There is something that most people don't realize when it comes to connection. Being constantly available doesn't make someone value you more. It often makes them get used to you. When you're always there, always responding, always showing up without pause, your presence slowly becomes predictable. And what becomes predictable often becomes overlooked. It's not intentional. It's human nature. When someone knows they can reach you at any time, when they feel your attention is always within reach, there is no urgency, no curiosity, no space to wonder about you. You become part of their routine instead of something they actively think about. And the truth is, people don't deeply miss what they always have access to. That's where everything begins to shift. The moment you stop being constantly available, the pattern breaks. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that feels forced or calculated, but in a way that creates space. And that space is powerful, because now, instead of always having your presence, he has moments without it. And those moments begin to matter. At first, he may not notice it immediately. He may assume you're busy, distracted, or simply doing your own thing. But as that space continues, something changes. He starts to feel the difference between having you there and not having you there at all. That's when awareness begins. He may find himself checking his phone, expecting a message that doesn't come as quickly as it used to. He may notice that conversations aren't as frequent, that your energy isn't as consistently directed toward him. And in that subtle shift, his attention starts to move, because now your presence is no longer guaranteed. And when something is no longer guaranteed, it becomes valuable. This isn't about ignoring him or playing games. It's about understanding that your time, your energy, your attention, these things have value. And when you give them endlessly without pause, that value becomes less visible. But when you create space, when you allow moments where you are not immediately available, it brings that value back into focus. He begins to think about you more. Not because you're chasing him, but because you're not always there. Not because you're trying to get his attention, but because your absence naturally creates it. And that's the difference between forced attraction and natural desire. Because when someone has to wonder about you, when they don't have constant access to your presence, their mind begins to fill that space. Thoughts appear, curiosity builds, and slowly your absence becomes something they notice more than your presence ever was. And that's where missing begins. It doesn't start with words. It doesn't start with effort. It starts with space. With the simple decision to not always be available, to not always respond instantly, to not always fill every moment with your presence. Because when you step back, even slightly, you give him something he didn't have before, the chance to feel what it's like without you. And once he feels that difference, even in small moments, everything begins to change. And once that space is created, something even more powerful begins to happen. You allow him to experience life without you, not in a way that disconnects everything, but in a way that removes your constant presence from his everyday routine. Because as long as you are always there, always filling the gaps, always bringing energy into the connection, he never truly feels the difference your absence creates. But when you step back, that contrast begins to form. At first, things may seem normal to him. His routine continues, his days move forward, and nothing appears dramatically different on the surface. But slowly, in the quiet moments, he begins to notice something missing. Not something loud or obvious, but something subtle, something familiar that is no longer there. That's your presence, because when you were there, you brought something into his life that he didn't have to think about. Your energy, your attention, your way of engaging, it all became part of his normal experience. And when something becomes normal, it often goes unrecognized until it's gone. Now, without you filling that space, he begins to feel the difference. He may find himself in moments where he expects to share something with you, a thought, a joke, an experience, but there is no immediate connection to turn to. And in that pause, he becomes aware. A small realization that something he once had access to is no longer there. And that awareness grows, because life without you doesn't feel the same. Not necessarily empty, not necessarily overwhelming, but different enough to be noticed. Conversations with others may not carry the same depth. Moments may feel slightly less engaging. There's a subtle contrast between what is and what used to be. And that contrast is where the emotion begins, because people don't fully understand value when it's constantly present. They understand it when they experience its absence, when they feel the gap it leaves behind, when they recognize the difference it creates in their daily life. This is not about trying to prove your worth. It's about allowing him to feel it, without reminders, without explanations, without effort to make him see it. Because when realization comes from his own experience, it becomes real in a way that words never could. He begins to connect the dots. The way things felt when you were there versus how they feel now. The ease, the familiarity, the emotional presence you brought into his life. And in that comparison, your value becomes clear. Not because you told him, but because he felt it. And that feeling stays, because once someone experiences that contrast, they can't ignore it. It becomes something they carry, something they think about, something they begin to miss. And that's the shift. You didn't chase, you didn't convince, you didn't force anything. You simply stepped back and allowed him to experience life without you. And in that experience, he begins to understand exactly what your presence meant. And as he begins to feel that difference, something even deeper starts to take hold. What he remembers about you is no longer just your presence, but how you made him feel. Because at the end of the day, people don't hold on to how often someone was there. They hold on to the emotions that were created in those moments. That's what makes someone unforgettable. It's not constant texting, not being available every second, not filling every silence. It's the depth of the connection when you were there. The way conversations felt, the way moments carried meaning, the way your presence created something beyond the surface. Because when connection is only based on frequency, it fades easily, but when it's built on emotion, it stays. He may not remember every detail of what was said, every message, every interaction, but he remembers the feeling, the ease, the comfort, the excitement, the calmness. Whatever it was that your presence brought into his life, that's what lingers. And that's what his mind returns to, especially now in your absence, because without new interactions to replace those feelings, the old ones begin to stand out even more. He starts to replay moments, not just to remember what happened, but to reconnect with how it felt. And that's where emotional memory becomes powerful, because emotions don't fade as quickly as moments do. He may think about a conversation you had, and instead of focusing on the words, he feels the tone, the connection, the way everything flowed naturally. He may remember a simple moment, something small, but it carries weight because of how it made him feel at the time. And slowly those feelings begin to build again in his mind. That's the difference between being present and being emotionally memorable. Anyone can show up. Anyone can be available. But not everyone creates an emotional impact that stays even after they're gone. And when you do that, when your presence is tied to something deeper than just time or attention, it becomes difficult to replace. Because he's not just missing you, he's missing how he felt with you. And that's something he can't easily recreate. He may try to move forward, to focus on other things, but those emotional impressions remain. They surface in quiet moments, in comparisons, in reflections, and every time they do, they reinforce something important. What he experienced with you was different. Not louder, not more dramatic, but deeper. And depth is what lasts. Because surface-level connections can be replaced quickly. But something that touched him emotionally, something that made him feel understood, comfortable, alive in a certain way, that stays. And that's what makes him think about you again and again. Not because you were always there, but because when you were there, it meant something. And deep down, he realizes this. He doesn't just remember you. He remembers how you made him feel, and that's what he can't let go of. And as those feelings continue to linger in his mind, something else begins to shift. Not in him at first, but in you. Because the moment you stop chasing, The moment you stop directing your energy toward him, everything about your presence changes. It becomes less of trying to maintain the connection and more about returning to yourself. And that shift is powerful because when your focus is constantly on him, his responses, his actions, his attention, you slowly lose the balance of your own energy. Everything becomes reactive. Your mood, your thoughts, your time, all connected to what he does or doesn't do. And without realizing it, you begin to give more than you receive, hoping it will bring things closer. But when you stop chasing, that cycle breaks. You begin to redirect that energy inward, back into your own life, your own growth, your own peace. You start doing things not to distract yourself, but to genuinely reconnect with who you are outside of the connection. Your time becomes yours again. Your attention becomes intentional again. And that creates a different kind of presence because now you're not waiting. You're not checking constantly. You're not adjusting your energy based on his. You're grounded in yourself, and that grounded energy shows even without words. He feels it. Even from a distance, there is a shift. You are no longer as predictable, no longer as focused on him, no longer available in the same way. And that difference naturally pulls his attention back toward you. Not because you're trying to get it, but because you're no longer giving it so freely. And that changes the dynamic. Because attention that is always given can be overlooked. But attention that is redirected becomes noticeable. He may start to wonder what you're doing, where your focus has gone, why your energy feels different. And in that curiosity, his attention begins to move toward you again. This is not about playing games. It's about alignment, because when you are fully focused on your own life, your own growth, your own happiness, you naturally become more centered, more confident, more at ease. And that kind of energy doesn't chase, it attracts. He may begin to notice that you're not reacting the same way, not reaching out the same way, not engaging in the same patterns. And that absence of pursuit creates a space where he begins to lean in, because now the effort is no longer one-sided. And what makes this powerful is that it's not forced. You're not pretending to be distant. You are simply no longer chasing something that requires you to lose yourself. You've shifted your focus back to where it belongs. And in doing so, you've changed how you are seen. Because when a woman values her own time, her own energy, her own presence, it becomes something others begin to value too. And deep down, he realizes this. When you stopped chasing him, you didn't lose his attention. You made him start chasing yours. And as your energy continues to shift and your focus remains grounded in yourself, something even more powerful begins to take place. Not through what you say, but through how you leave. Because there's a difference between walking away with noise and walking away with impact. Most people, when things begin to fall apart or feel uncertain, react emotionally. They try to explain everything, express every feeling, get closure, or make sure they are fully understood before stepping back. And while that may feel natural, it often removes the very thing that creates lasting impact. Mystery, but when you leave without drama, everything changes. You don't argue. You don't over-explain. You don't try to force him to see your value. You simply step back with clarity and calmness. And that kind of exit is unexpected. Because instead of giving him all the answers, you leave space behind. And that space is where his mind begins to work. At first, he may not fully understand it. He may expect a reaction, a message, some form of emotional expression that he can respond to or dismiss. But when none of that comes, it creates something different. Silence. And silence, when it follows connection, is powerful. Because now there is nothing to respond to, only something to think about. He begins to question what happened. Not because you explained it, but because you didn't. He replays the last moments, the last conversations, trying to understand where things shifted, what he might have missed, what you were feeling that you didn't fully express. And those unanswered questions stay with him. Because when everything is explained, the mind has closure. But when things are left open, when there are no final words, no emotional release, it creates a loop a constant return to the same thoughts, the same moments, the same uncertainty. And that loop keeps you present in his mind. This is not about withholding communication to create confusion. It's about choosing not to exhaust yourself trying to be understood. It's about recognizing that your value doesn't need to be explained in detail. And when you carry that understanding, your actions reflect it. You leave with dignity. You leave without trying to prove anything. And that's what creates impact. Because now, instead of remembering an argument or a long explanation, he remembers the absence, the quiet way you step back, the lack of chaos where he may have expected it. And that difference stands out. He may begin to wonder why you didn't fight harder, why you didn't try to convince him, why you were able to walk away without creating noise. And in that wondering, something shifts. He starts to see you differently. Not as someone who needed the connection to stay, but as someone who chose to leave when it no longer aligned. And that choice carries weight because it shows strength, self-respect, and clarity. And those are things that don't fade easily in someone's mind. And deep down, he realizes this. Your silence didn't end the connection. It made him think about it more than ever before. And as time continues to move forward, something even more powerful begins to define everything. Not just your absence, not just your silence, but who you become after it all. Because the final shift doesn't come from what you took away. It comes from how you evolve. You don't stay the same. You don't remain in the same place emotionally, mentally, or even in the way you carry yourself. Instead of looking back, instead of holding on to what was, you begin to grow. You focus on your life, your goals, your peace, your identity outside of the connection. And that growth is not loud. It's steady, real, and undeniable. And that's what changes how he sees you. Because when he thinks about you now, he's not thinking about the same version he once knew. There is a sense that you've moved forward, that you're no longer accessible in the same way, that the connection he once had with you doesn't exist in the same form anymore. And that realization creates something powerful. Distance, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. You are no longer within reach in the way you used to be. And that's what creates desire. Because people are naturally drawn to what they feel they can no longer easily access. Not because they want control, but because they recognize value in what is no longer available to them. And when you evolve, when you grow beyond the version of yourself that was tied to that connection, you naturally become more distant from it. Not intentionally, but inevitably. He may begin to notice changes, maybe through what he hears, what he sees, or simply through the feeling that you are no longer the same. You're not reacting, not reaching out, not engaging in the same patterns. There's a sense of independence, of forward movement, of something that no longer revolves around him. And that creates impact because now, if he thinks about reconnecting, he's not approaching the same dynamic. He's approaching someone who has changed, someone who has grown, someone who is no longer waiting in the same place. And that requires more effort, more intention, more awareness, because you are no longer available in the same way. And that shift forces him to see you at a higher level. You didn't just step back, you moved forward. And that forward movement is what makes you unforgettable because it shows that your life didn't pause when the connection changed. It continued, it expanded, it evolved. And in doing so, you became something more than what he experienced before. Something he can't easily return to and can't easily replace. And deep down, he understands this. He doesn't just miss you because you're gone. He misses you because you became someone he can no longer have in the same way.